American stealth bombers and submarines launched a massive coordinated attack targeting...
A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, and we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival.
Imagine you're in the Situation Room. It's February 26th. The Geneva Talks are happening today. The CIA just delivered a report that has the president reading it twice. The Israelis are asking for a green light. The Iranians are moving missile batteries into civilian areas. And China is quietly reminding Washington that $200 billion in trade and a presidential visit hang in the balance. Here's what no one will tell you. All sides believe they're acting defensively. All sides have evidence the other is preparing to strike. And all sides have red lines they've told themselves they will never cross. The problem? Those red lines are about to intersect. In January 2026, the World Economic Forum surveyed over 1,300 experts and ranked geoeconomic confrontation as the top near-term risk. But here's what that dry language doesn't capture. We are living through a moment where 3 separate crises are becoming one. In the Middle East, the US and Iran are engaged in indirect nuclear talks mediated by Oman. The third round happens today, February 26th in Geneva. But while diplomats talk, the military clocks are ticking. In East Asia, the US is preparing what sources describe as a large arms sale to Taiwan. The package has been reported as potentially huge and disruptive to Beijing, with some reporting figures suggesting it could scale to very large totals. And in Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war just entered its 4th year, with at least about 15,170 civilian deaths recorded since February 2022, according to aggregated UN monitoring. These aren't separate stories. They're the same, because the question every capital is asking is the same: who blinks first? From Tehran's vantage point, the last decade reads like a warning manual. In 2015, Iran signed the nuclear deal. It accepted strict limits, opened its facilities to inspectors, and watched as the United States withdrew anyway in 2018. Then came the assassinations. Scientists killed by roadside bombs, cyber weapons destroying centrifuges, and a shadow war that never stopped. So when Iranian officials sit down in Geneva today, they bring a mindset shaped by that history. Their demand: verifiable sanctions relief before any nuclear concessions. They're non-negotiable. The ballistic missile program, which they describe not as an offensive weapon, but as insurance against the fate of Libya, Iraq, and any country that gave up its deterrent and later regretted it. And their warning, delivered just this week by Rasul Sanai Rad: if Americans attempt to make a mistake against Iran, they must be prepared to welcome long lines of coffins carrying their soldiers. Is that rhetoric? Certainly. But it's also a window into how Tehran sees the stakes. From their perspective, they're not the aggressor. They're the country that's been attacked by sanctions, by sabotage, by assassination, and is simply making clear that the next round will cost more than the last. Now cross the strait all the way to Washington. From here, the picture looks different. The US has deployed what several outlets describe as one of the largest air presences in the region in years, including the movement of a second carrier strike group and reports of more than 300 US aircraft. 12 F-22 Raptors were also reported to have landed at an Israeli base this week as part of that buildup. The official reason: deterrence. The unofficial reality: options. But here's what keeps Pentagon planners up at night: Israel may not wait. According to Channel 12, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened his security cabinet this week specifically to discuss the possibility of a US strike on Iran, and reportedly asked a US official afterward, "Is he still with us?" Worried. That's the dilemma in a nutshell. Washington wants diplomacy to work, or at least to be seen trying. But its closest ally in the region is watching the clock, calculating that every day without action is another day Iran gets closer to a nuclear capability. And then there's the question Netanyahu reportedly raised with his advisors. Would Hezbollah enter a full-scale war if the U.S. strikes? Israeli officials are divided. Some say the Lebanese group would calculate that the cost is too high. Others say Hezbollah's entire reason for existing is to respond when Iran is attacked. The answer to that question could determine whether a U.S.-Iran confrontation stays contained or becomes a regional firestorm. Now here's where the story gets truly unpredictable. While the world watches the Persian Gulf, a separate crisis is brewing 4,000 miles away. And it has the potential to reshape everything. The Financial Times and other outlets have reported the U.S. is compiling a very large arms package for Taiwan that Beijing says could jeopardize a presidential visit. Reporting described the diplomatic stakes more than the exact price tag, though some coverage used very large illustrative figures. China's response. Delivered through Ambassador Xie Feng in Washington. This could derail Donald Trump's planned April visit to Beijing. Think about what that means. The same president who would have to authorize any strike on Iran is also preparing for a high-stakes diplomatic summit with China. His administration is simultaneously negotiating with Iran through Omani mediators, arming Taiwan over Beijing's objections, trying to maintain pressure on Russia over Ukraine, and managing an ally in Israel that may have its own timeline. One official told the Financial Times that some in Washington believe China is bluffing, that Beijing wouldn't actually cancel the Trump visit over an arms sale. But here's the question no one can answer. What if they're not bluffing? And what if Iran calculates that a U.S. distracted by a Taiwan crisis is a U.S. that can't fight a two-front war? February 26, 2026. Geneva, Switzerland. The third round of U.S.-Iran indirect talks begins today. Omani mediators shuttle between hotel suites, carrying proposals back and forth. The Americans want Iran to halt enrichment and remove stockpiled material. The Iranians want sanctions relief, verifiable, complete, and guaranteed against future withdrawal. But here's what the public doesn't see. In Tel Aviv, the Security Cabinet is in near continuous session. Intelligence and regional analysts say Iran is hardening and repositioning missile units, and some reports indicate moves that place launchers closer to populated areas, actions that complicate any preemptive strike. In Tehran, the leadership is watching the U.S. naval buildup and calculating whether this is diplomacy backed by pressure or pressure waiting for diplomacy to fail. And in Washington, the president faces a choice that no commander-in-chief wants. If the talks show a little bit of progress, as previous rounds have been described, does he hold back Israel? Does he risk his ally acting alone? And if the talks collapse, does he strike knowing that China is watching, that Taiwan is waiting, and that the next hours could define his entire second term? This is the moment. Not because war is inevitable, but because every side has a definition of acceptable outcome that conflicts with every other side's definition of existential threat. While capitals calculate, people live with the consequences. In Iran, ordinary citizens remember the last round of sanctions, the inflation, the shortages, the way diplomacy raised hopes and then crushed them. They watch their leaders warn of coffins carrying American soldiers and wonder what that means for their own sons. In Israel, civilians have spent years under rocket fire. They've watched Iron Dome interceptors light up the night sky. They support a strong response to threats, but they also remember what war feels like. In Taiwan, families watch the military buildup on both sides of the strait. They hear the U.S. promise weapons and China promise consequences, and they ask themselves the question no poll can answer. If it comes, will anyone really fight for us? And in the United States, a public exhausted by 2 decades of Middle East wars watches another crisis unfold. The last thing most Americans want is another conflict, But the last thing they'll accept is a nuclear-armed Iran. This is the tragedy of geopolitics. Every capital acts rationally from its own perspective, and rational actors pursuing their own security can still walk toward a war no one wants. So where does this leave us? The talks resume in Geneva today. Iran says its missile program is never negotiable. The US says it cannot accept a nuclear-capable Iran. Israel says it cannot accept a nuclear-capable Iran that calls for its destruction. And China watches from the wings, weighing its own interests against its alliances. Here's what we know. February 26th will bring either progress or stalemate. If there's progress, the crisis pauses, but doesn't end. If there's stalemate, Israel may face its hardest choice in decades. And if there's a strike, no one knows how Hezbollah, the Houthis, or the global economy will respond. Here's what we don't know. Whether any of these actors truly understand the other's red lines, whether the signals each side sends are being received as intended, or whether somewhere in a bunker in Tehran, Tel Aviv, or Washington, an officer is about to make a decision based on information that's incomplete, and start a chain reaction no one can stop. On February 26th, diplomats will sit in a Geneva hotel and try to bridge a gap that has already cost billions, consumed thousands of lives, and shaped the destiny of an entire region. They may succeed, they may fail. But here's the part that doesn't make the headlines. Every single person in that room believes they're doing the right thing. The Iranian negotiator believes he's protecting his country from the fate of Libya. The American diplomat believes she's preventing a nuclear arms race. The Israeli intelligence officer believes he's stopping another Holocaust. And the Chinese observer, watching from the sidelines, believes a multipolar world requires that no single power dominate the Gulf or the Strait. So here's the question I'll leave with you, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. In a world where every side believes it's acting defensively, who's really to blame when war breaks out? Is it the country that strikes first? The country that made the strike feel necessary? Or the international system that never found a way to make both sides feel secure? Because the answer to that question isn't just philosophy. It's the difference between the next war and the last one. If this video gave you a new way of seeing this crisis, not as good guys versus bad guys, but as rational actors on a collision course, then hit subscribe. I release new geopolitical deep dives every week. No propaganda, no taking sides, just the story behind the headlines. And click the video on screen now